In the heart of a dying galaxy, where stars blinked like tired eyes and nebulae painted the void in hues of forgotten dreams, there stood a palace that defied both gravity and time. It floated above the molten rings of Xylos Prime, suspended by ancient magnetic fields and powered by the pulse of a captured star at its core. The Palace of Luminar was carved from crystal harvested from dead suns, translucent spires spiraling into the sky like frozen music, glowing with inner fire as if lit by memories rather than light. At its highest tower, where silence reigned louder than thunder, sat Queen Seraphine, ruler of the Velari Dominion, whose beauty was said to have stopped wars before they began. She had skin like moonlight poured over snow, hair like spun silver threads caught in an eternal breeze, and eyes that shimmered with galaxies swirling behind them. Her voice could calm supernovas, her gaze made comets change course. Entire civilizations had collapsed just trying to earn her attention. And yet, for all the poets, warriors, and gods who'd knelt before her throne singing odes to her perfection, none had ever truly seen her. Until him. He arrived not in a warship or diplomatic vessel, but in a dented, smoke-belching escape pod labeled Property of Zarnak Freight, Do Not Kick. It crash-landed through one of the lower observatory domes during a royal symposium on interdimensional diplomacy, scattering delegates and knocking over a priceless sculpture made entirely of frozen sound waves. From within crawled a man so unremarkable, he looked like someone had tried to invent average and accidentally undershot. His name was Milo Pendergast, though no one would have guessed it from his appearance. He wore a stained jumpsuit 2 sizes too big, boots held together with wire and hope, and carried a satchel full of questionable snacks and outdated navigation maps. He wasn't tall, nor particularly strong. His hair was brownish, somewhere between mud and toast, and his face bore the kind of features that blended into crowds. Average nose, slightly crooked teeth, eyes that changed color depending on what he was wearing, usually grayish-green. If you passed him on a spaceport walkway, you'd forget him before reaching the next terminal. Yet when the palace guards dragged him before the Queen's obsidian throne, something shifted in the air. Not in the room, but in reality itself. As though the universe leaned forward, curious. Milo didn't bow. He didn't tremble. He didn't recite poetry or beg for mercy. Instead, he blinked up at the radiant being seated above him, tilted his head like a confused dog, and said, "Wait, you're real." The chamber gasped. One ambassador fainted. Another quietly began recording everything for blackmail purposes. Seraphine, accustomed to declarations of love, offers of eternal servitude, and elaborate suicide attempts performed in her honor, narrowed her cosmic eyes. "I assure you," she said, her voice resonating like wind through cathedral pipes, "I am quite real, and you are trespassing on sovereign Velari territory, unauthorized, uninvited, and, judging by the smell, unwashed." "I wasn't aiming for here," Milo mumbled, brushing dust off his shoulder. "I was trying to get to Vega 9. Got a cousin running a noodle stand near the asteroid belt. Promised to send me coupons." He sniffed. "Nice place, though. Very shiny." Laughter rippled through the courtiers. Not mocking, not cruel, but genuine, startled amusement. It had been millennia since anyone had spoken to the Queen like she was just a person. Seraphine studied him. Not his clothes, not his rank, not his species, which registered as baseline human, third-tier galactic citizenship, negligible threat level, but him. There was no fear in his posture, no awe clouding his expression. Just mild bewilderment, like he'd walked into the wrong bathroom. And then, without warning, he smiled. It wasn't dazzling. It wasn't perfect. One tooth stuck out slightly, and his left eye crinkled more than the right. But it was warm, real, like sunlight sneaking through storm clouds. Something inside her chest flickered. She should have had him imprisoned, or vaporized, or at least handed over to the bio-quarantine division. He did look suspiciously grubby. But instead, she waved her hand, dismissing the guards. "Keep him," she said, "for questioning," which, in the secretive language of queens everywhere, meant, "I want to see what this strange little creature does next." So Milo stayed. At first, everyone assumed it was temporary. A glitch, an error in judgment caused by atmospheric interference or perhaps a rare form of space madness. But days passed, then weeks, and still Milo wandered the halls of Luminar Palace like he owned the place, or more accurately, like he thought it was a very fancy hotel. He ate the ceremonial fruit offered only to high priests, and burped politely afterward. He fell asleep during sacred chants. He once used a relic orb of infinite knowledge as a footstool while reading a comic book titled Space Slugs and Sorcery. He asked the royal chef to make grilled cheese sandwiches. With extra butter, please. No fancy alien cheese that screams when you bite it. And somehow, impossibly, the staff obeyed. Because Milo had a way about him. A quiet, unshakable kindness wrapped in clumsy charm. He remembered names. He fixed broken machines with paper clips and gum. He told terrible jokes that somehow became funnier the second time around. And every evening, without fail, he visited the queen. Not to petition, not to flatter, just to talk. They sat on the balcony overlooking the burning rings of Xylos, sipping tea brewed from meteor dust and stardust lilies. He brought stories from Earth. Absurd things like competitive knitting tournaments, dogs dressed as historical figures, and a planet-wide holiday dedicated to eating fried potatoes. She listened, at first out of curiosity, then fascination, then something deeper she couldn't name. One night, under a sky streaked with comet trails, she finally asked, "Why do you find me so beautiful, human?" The question hung in the air like a falling star refusing to land. Milo nearly choked on his sandwich. "What? You heard me," she said, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Every being who has stood before me has called me beautiful. Poets have wept. Kings have died declaring my perfection. Gods have rewritten their pantheons to include my likeness. But you look at me like I'm just another person. So why do you, of all people, think I am beautiful?" He swallowed, wiped his hands on his pants, and stared out at the cosmos. For once, he wasn't joking. "See, that's the thing," he said slowly. "I don't." Silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then he turned to her, eyes serious in a way she hadn't seen before. "I don't think you're beautiful. I know you're not." Her breath caught. "But that's not because you aren't," he added quickly. "It's because beautiful is too small a word. Like calling the ocean a puddle, or saying fire is just warm. You're not beautiful, Your Highness. You're more than that." She stared at him. "When I first saw you," he went on, "I didn't feel awe. I didn't fall to my knees. I felt recognition, like I'd known you forever. Like maybe I dreamed about you when I was a kid, before I forgot how to dream. You're not beautiful like a painting or a sunset. You're beautiful like home, like the moment your mom opens the door after you've been lost in the rain. Like finding your favorite song playing in a foreign city. That kind of beautiful doesn't come from looks. Comes from presence. From the way you make the world feel bigger just by being in it." Tears welled in her star-filled eyes. Not because she was sad, but because no one had ever spoken to her soul before. Only her image. Only her power. Only her myth. "And besides," he added, grinning suddenly, "you snort when you laugh. Even if you try to hide it. That's not queenly. That's human. And I like it." She burst out laughing. And yes, she snorted. From that moment, something changed. Not in the galaxy. Not in the laws of physics. But in the quiet space between two beings who had, against all odds, found each other across the vast loneliness of existence. Word spread. Of course it did. Whispers echoed through the stars. The untouchable Queen Seraphine had taken a liking to a filthy, insignificant human. Mockery followed. Insults were flung across diplomatic channels. Some called it a scandal, others a tragedy. A few whispered darker things, that he had enchanted her, poisoned her mind, used forbidden technology to manipulate her emotions. Among the loudest voices was Lord Vrax, commander of the Valari Eternal Guard, a warrior clad in armor forged from neutron stars, his body enhanced by centuries of genetic refinement. Tall, flawless, with eyes like frozen lightning, he had served the crown faithfully for 900 years, and harbored a secret devotion to the queen that bordered on obsession. To him, Milo was an insult, a stain on the purity of the royal line. "How can you tolerate him?" Vrax demanded one morning in the War Council chamber, fists clenched so tightly his gauntlets cracked. "He eats with his hands. He wears sandals in the Hall of Echoing Truth." He referred to the sacred flame as a nice lamp. Seraphine sipped her tea calmly. "He also repaired the quantum stabilizer in 3 hours when your engineers failed for 3 months. And he made the children in the lower districts laugh for the first time since the Shadow War. That does not excuse his rudeness, his ignorance, his commonness." "Perhaps not," she said, setting down her cup. "But he sees me, not the crown, not the legend, not the weapon of mass peace. He sees me, and that, Lord Vrax, is rarer than any gem in this palace." Vrax stormed out, fury radiating from him like heat from a dying star. That night, Milo disappeared. No alarm sounded. No breach detected. One moment he was in his assigned quarters, reading a tattered novel titled How to Win Friends and Influence Robots, the next gone. Only a single footprint remained, pressed into the crystalline floor, smeared with traces of boot glue and something faintly metallic. Seraphine felt it before she heard it. A hollow ache in her chest, as if a piece of her had been torn away. She found the surveillance logs erased. All records of Milo's presence scrubbed from the system. Even the noodle coupons he'd collected were gone. It was as if he had never existed. Only one clue remained. A tiny shard of black alloy embedded in the window frame, residue from a stealth-class abduction drone, model used exclusively by high-ranking military units with royal clearance. Her eyes darkened. She knew who had done it. Without a word, she strode to the armory. Not the ceremonial one. The hidden vault beneath the palace, accessible only to the monarch, where weapons older than time slept in silence. She emerged clad in battle armor woven from the fabric of collapsed dimensions, a cloak of shifting shadows draped over her shoulders. In her hand, she carried the scepter of unmaking, a relic capable of unraveling matter, memory, even fate. The palace trembled as she ascended to the command bridge. "All ships," she announced, her voice echoing across every frequency. "Prepare for immediate deployment. We are going to war." "No," corrected a voice behind her. She turned. Milo stood there, disheveled, bruised, one arm in a makeshift sling fashioned from curtain fabric, but very much alive. "I'm not worth a war," he said gently. "You were kidnapped," she said, fury blazing. "Tortured, vanished, and I will burn every fleet in this quadrant to ash until I find who did this." "It was Vrax," Milo admitted. "But he didn't torture me. He tried to. Showed me holograms of galaxies burning, threatened me with mind-wipe tech, played sad violin music on loop for 6 hours. Honestly, kinda boring. I kept asking for water. Eventually, he just gave up and locked me in a storage closet with expired protein bars." Seraphine blinked. "That's it." "Well, he did say some stuff about how I was unworthy, how I'd never understand Her Majesty's grandeur, how I was a blight on the legacy of the Velari. Standard villain speech, really. Skipped the monologue about mother issues, though. Points for efficiency." She stared at him, then laughed. A real, full, joyful sound that made the stars outside pulse brighter. "You were held captive?" she said, shaking her head. "And all you can do is critique his dialogue? He could have used more dramatic lighting," Milo shrugged. "And maybe fewer clichés." She stepped forward, touching his face gently, her fingers trembling. "You could have been killed." "Yeah, well," he said softly, "if I'm gonna die, I'd rather it be saving someone than hiding in a cupboard eating stale rations. But I didn't. Thanks to you. I didn't do anything. You came for me," he said simply. "That's everything." Their eyes locked, not as queen and subject, not as alien and human, just as two souls who had stumbled into each other in the endless dark and refused to let go. But peace, like perfection, is fragile. Days later, an emergency beacon flared from the edge of known space. The distress signal of a refugee convoy fleeing the Crag Dominion, a brutal empire that consumed worlds like locusts devouring fields. They were defenseless, millions packed into crumbling ships, drifting toward the safety of Velari space. Seraphine ordered the fleet to intercept and protect them. Lord Vrax objected. "They are not our people," he argued in the war chamber. "They carry disease, instability, unknown genetic strains. We cannot risk contamination. Let them pass or perish." "They're innocent," Milo countered, standing beside the queen despite having no official rank. "Families, kids, old folks. You're telling me we just watch them die?" "We maintain order," Vrax said coldly. "We do not lower ourselves to save strays." "Strays?" Milo snapped. "They're people, like us, with feelings and hopes and bad taste in music." "The decision is mine," Seraphine said firmly. "We will protect them. Prepare the defensive grid." Vrax bowed stiffly. "As you command." But that night, the outer defense satellites went dark. Then the shields faltered. Then explosions rocked the lower levels of the palace. Betrayal. Vrax had launched a coup. Using loyalist factions within the Guard, he seized control of key systems, the throne room, and broadcast a message across the Dominion. The Queen had been compromised by an outsider, her judgment clouded by emotion. He would restore order. By force. Laser fire lit the crystal corridors. Gravity generators failed in sections, sending furniture and people floating into the air. Alarms wailed like wounded beasts. In the chaos, Milo grabbed a fire extinguisher, the only weapon he could find that didn't require reading instructions, and helped evacuate civilians from the collapsing East Wing. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't brave in the traditional sense. But he was stubborn, and he cared. Meanwhile, Seraphine fought like a storm given form. She moved through the palace like shadow and flame, dismantling Vrax's forces with precision and grace. Her scepter sliced through energy shields. Her voice disrupted communications. When a squad ambushed her in the Hall of Whispers, she sang a single note that turned their weapons to dust. But Vrax was waiting. He stood at the apex of the Sky Spire, armored in the black mantle of Ascendancy, a suit capable of absorbing energy attacks and reflecting them tenfold. Behind him, the refugee fleet hung in space, defenseless, targeted by stolen orbital cannons. "This ends now," he boomed. "Step down, Your Majesty. This is not weakness, it is salvation. We return to purity, to strength, without this distraction." "He is not a distraction," Seraphine said, her voice calm. "He is my equal. He is nothing." Vrax roared, firing a blast that cracked the spire in half. She dodged, retaliated, but his armor absorbed her energy, sending it back amplified. She crashed through 3 walls, landing hard on a floating terrace. Above, the cannons charged. Milo arrived breathless, clutching his fire extinguisher like a sword. "You okay?" he panted. "I've been better," she admitted. "We can't beat him head-on," Milo said, glancing up. "Too much armor. Too many guns. But maybe we don't have to." "What do you mean?" He grinned. "Remember what you said about me fixing things?" Before she could answer, he sprinted toward the central control node, an exposed nexus of wires and pulsing crystals that regulated the palace's magnetic field. It was heavily guarded, but Milo didn't fight. He distracted. He tripped one guard with a loose cable, tossed protein bar wrappers in another's face, distraction snack, and used a janitorial drone to spray lubricant on the floor, sending 3 soldiers sliding into a wall. Then he reached the node, and did something no engineer would ever dare. He unplugged it. The entire palace shuddered. Gravity flickered. Lights died. Every powered system, including Vrax's armor, sputtered and failed. In the sudden darkness, Milo yelled, "Now!" Seraphine moved. She lunged upward, not with force, but with speed, using the zero gravity to her advantage. She struck not at Vrax, but at the control panel on his back, the weak point Milo had spotted earlier, disguised beneath layers of plating. The armor died. Vrax screamed as he plummeted, caught only by a last-second tractor beam activated from the command center. The cannons powering up toward the refugee fleet deactivated. Silence fell. Then, slowly, lights returned. Systems rebooted. Peace resumed. Milo sat against a broken pillar, breathing hard, covered in soot and pride. Seraphine landed beside him. "You could have died," she whispered. "So could you," he said. "Worth it." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the man who ate with his fingers and told bad jokes, but the one who faced down warriors and empires with nothing but courage and a fire extinguisher. And in that moment, she understood. Beauty wasn't in symmetry or glow or flawless design. It was in choice, in kindness, in showing up, again and again, even when you're scared. She took his hand, and together, they watched the stars turn gentle once more. The silence that followed the battle wasn't empty. It was full of breath returning, hearts slowing, wounds healing. The palace, though cracked and scorched in places, still stood, its crystal heart pulsing softly like a lullaby sung by ancient machines. Outside, the refugee fleet began to move again, guided gently into safe orbit by the reactivated defense grid. Cheers rose from the lower districts, where citizens had watched the sky light up with conflict and then, miraculously, peace. But inside the broken spire, there was only stillness between them. Milo sat slumped against a fractured pillar, one hand clutching his side where a falling beam had clipped him, the other still wrapped around the dented fire extinguisher like it might be called back into duty at any moment. His hair was singed at the edges, his jumpsuit torn, and there was a smudge of what looked like alien grease across his nose. He should have looked ridiculous. To Seraphine, he had never been more radiant. She knelt beside him, Her armor dim now, its fury spent. Gently, she placed a hand on his cheek. Her fingers glowed faintly, not with power, but with healing. A soft silver light that seeped into his skin, knitting muscle, soothing pain. It didn't erase the bruises or the exhaustion, but it eased them, like warm tea on a cold night. "You're hurt," she whispered. "So are you," he said, grinning weakly. "And way more dramatically. I mean, look at you, glowing, floating, doing magic touch. Meanwhile, I got hit by a piece of ceiling. Not exactly heroic." "It was heroic," she said firmly. "You stopped a war. You saved lives. You believed in me when no one else would have." He tilted his head, studying her face. The impossible grace of her features, the galaxy-deep eyes, the way even now, after everything, she looked at him like he mattered. "I didn't do it for you," he said finally. Her breath caught. "I did it because you're right," he continued. "About everything. About kindness being stronger than fear. About protecting people even when it's hard. Even when they don't belong. That's not just you. That's what the world should be. And if believing in that makes me brave, then fine. I'm brave." Tears welled in her eyes. Not the silent, dignified kind queens were supposed to shed, but messy, human ones that slipped free before she could stop them. "You make me feel small," she admitted. "Not weak, just real. Like I'm not a symbol or a weapon or a legend. Just a woman who sometimes eats too many Stardust pastries and laughs too loud at bad jokes. And snores," Milo added. "Sorry. Heard you last week during the diplomatic summit nap break." She laughed through her tears. "I do not snore. Like a space bear hibernating in a tin can. You're impossible. And yet here you are." They sat in silence as the stars turned above them, the weight of what had passed settling like dust after a storm. Around them, the palace hummed back to life. Servants rushing to repair, guards securing the halls, engineers rerouting power. Vrax had been taken into custody, stripped of rank, his armor sealed away. He hadn't spoken since his fall, staring into the void as if seeing something no one else could. But Milo and Seraphine didn't speak of him. Not yet. There would be time for justice, for reckoning. For now, there was only this. Two souls, bruised and battered, sitting in the ruins of a broken spire, holding hands like teenagers on a first date. Days passed, then weeks. Milo didn't return to Earth. No one expected him to. Instead, he stayed, not as a consort, not as a king, not even as an official advisor, though he kept showing up at meetings anyway, usually late with crumbs on his shirt. He simply stayed. And slowly, quietly, he changed everything. He convinced the royal kitchen to start serving grilled cheese sandwiches every Tuesday. "People need comfort food, Your Majesty. Even immortal beings with 6 stomachs." He opened the palace gardens to the public, turning them into a park where children played among floating flowers and elders told stories beneath gravity-defying trees. He started a weekly Ask the Human Hour in the Central Plaza, where citizens could come and ask anything, no matter how silly. Questions ranged from, "Why do humans wear socks?" to "Is love really worth dying for?" He answered them all with honesty, humor, and occasional snack breaks. And every evening, without fail, he met Seraphine on the balcony. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they just watched the rings of Xylos burn in slow revolutions, or listened to the distant songs of star whales echoing through the void. One night, as a double moon rose over the crystal spires, Seraphine turned to him and said, "You've never asked for anything, have you?" Milo blinked. "Huh. In all this time, in all the chaos, you've fixed things, helped people, stood by me, but you've never asked for power, for wealth, for titles. Why?" He shrugged, chewing on a piece of space apple. "Never really wanted any of that stuff. Back on Earth, I worked in a library. Quiet job. Nice people. Got to read all day. Never dreamed of palaces or wars or glowing queens. But now you have them." "Yeah," he said softly. "And I'd give it all up tomorrow if it meant keeping you safe." She stared at him. "You'd leave? Just like that?" "No," he said, meeting her gaze. "I'd stay, because you're my dream now. Not the palace, not the power, not the fancy lights, just you, laughing, living, being you. That's enough for me." Her heart swelled so fiercely she thought it might burst. And then, for the first time in her long, immortal life, she kissed him. It wasn't grand. No fireworks lit the sky. No choir sang. Just lips meeting, soft and tentative, like two puzzle pieces finding their place after a lifetime of searching. When they pulled apart, Milo grinned. So, does this mean I get a raise? She shoved him playfully, laughing. You're insufferable. And you love me anyway. I do, she said, suddenly serious. I do love you, Milo Pendergast. Not because you're strong or noble or perfect, but because you're kind. Because you see the world differently. Because you make me want to be better. Not for my people, not for my legacy, but for you. He took her hand, pressing it to his chest. Then let's build something new. Not just a kingdom, a home, where everyone belongs, where no one gets left behind, where the queen eats grilled cheese and the janitor tells the best jokes. She smiled. A world like that would be beautiful. No, he said, squeezing her hand. It'd be us. Word spread faster than light. The queen of the Vaylari had fallen in love. Not with a god. Not with a warrior. Not with a prince of some mighty empire. With a human. A messy, ordinary, extraordinary human who carried snacks in his pockets and fixed broken things with duct tape and hope. Some mocked. Some feared. Some called it the end of order. But millions celebrated. Refugees wept with joy. Children drew pictures of a smiling queen holding hands with a man in a crooked hat. Artists painted murals of Milo standing beside her throne, not above anyone, but with them all. And slowly the Dominion began to change. Borders opened. Aid flowed to forgotten worlds. The military shifted from enforcement to protection. Schools taught empathy alongside science. Even the old priests, who had once demanded silence and reverence, began to laugh. Because how could you stay solemn when the queen herself giggled every time Milo told the joke about the three-eyed cow and the teleporting farmer? Yet peace, once won, is always fragile. Whispers returned. From the outer dark, beyond the mapped stars, came rumors of a new threat. A force older than the Vaylari, older than time itself. The Void Maw, a consciousness born from the absence between galaxies, consuming entire systems, leaving only silence in its wake. Planets vanished overnight. Signals died. Stars blinked out, not with explosion, but with sigh. Fear spread. And with fear came doubt. He brought this, some muttered. An outsider. A disruption. The balance is broken. The queen has weakened, others claimed. Love has made her soft. Even members of the council hesitated. Perhaps, said the elder archivist, we should consider separation, for the safety of the realm. Seraphine heard them all, and when the council gathered in the Hall of Echoing Truth, she rose. Not in anger, not in sorrow, but in quiet strength. You speak of balance, she said, her voice calm, carrying through the vast chamber. Of tradition, of purity. But tell me, what is balance if not harmony between light and dark? What is tradition, if not the echo of choices made long ago by beings who thought they knew best? And what is purity, if not fear dressed in gold? She stepped forward, the hem of her gown trailing light across the floor. I am not weaker because I love. I am stronger. Milo did not disrupt our order, he expanded it. He showed us that strength is not in isolation, but in connection. Not in perfection, but in compassion. She turned, and the doors of the hall parted. Milo stood there, not in armor, not in royal robes, but in his usual worn jumpsuit, a thermos in one hand, a bag of sandwiches in the other. I brought lunch, he said sheepishly. Laughter rippled through the room. Even the sternest counselor cracked a smile. Seraphine walked to him, took his hand, and faced them all. If the Void Maw comes, she said, we will face it together, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as a people, as a family, and if we fall together. That night, under a sky streaked with approaching storm clouds of anti-light, Milo and Seraphine stood once more on the balcony. He leaned against the railing, sipping terrible instant coffee from a chipped mug. She stood close, her head resting on his shoulder. You know, he said, if we die tomorrow, I kinda want it to be doing something fun, like racing hoverbikes through a nebula, or eating ice cream during a meteor shower. She smiled. You're ridiculous. But you love me. I do, she whispered. More than stars. More than time. He turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. Then let's make sure there's plenty of both. And as the first tendrils of the Void Maw brushed the edge of the galaxy, casting shadows across 1,000 worlds, two figures stood at the edge of eternity. Not as warriors, not as legends, but as lovers. One made of stardust and time, the other made of flaws, laughter, and love. Together they faced the dark. The day the stars aligned above Xylo's prime, the palace of Luminar shimmered with light so pure it turned night into dawn. Banners of every known species fluttered in the zero-gravity breeze, and flowers from 1,000 worlds bloomed across the crystal halls. On that morning, Queen Seraphine did what no ruler in Valari history had ever done. She stepped down from her throne, not to abdicate, but to walk freely toward the man waiting at the end of the aisle. Milo stood there in a slightly too tight suit borrowed from the royal tailor, his hair combed for once, holding a bouquet of earth daisies and one grilled cheese sandwich just in case. He wasn't wearing a crown, nor seeking power. He was simply Milo, nervous, grinning, and utterly in love. When Seraphine reached him, she didn't kneel. He didn't bow. Instead, they clasped hands, and together, spoke the ancient vow not of rulers or gods, but of equals. Asterisk, I choose you, today and always. Asterisk, the galaxy watched, and for the first time in memory, peace wasn't declared, it was celebrated. Their wedding feast lasted 7 days. Refugees danced with nobles. Robots told jokes. Children flew on tamed comets. Even Lord Vrax, released under strict supervision, attended grumbling, arms crossed, but with the faintest hint of approval in his eyes. A year later, their first child was born. A girl with silver hair and Milo's crooked smile, named Lyra. She laughed before she cried, and her eyes sparkled like starlight on water. Then came Kale, who could fix broken circuits just by touching them. Then Mira, who sang lullabies that made storms pause. Then Tiny Jax, who once accidentally turned the royal library into a jungle using a forgotten gadget Milo left lying around. They had 5, then 8, then 12. A chaotic, joyful whirlwind of laughter, sticky fingers, and bedtime stories about brave humans and radiant queens. Milo taught them how to make sandwiches, tell bad jokes, and never be afraid to ask questions. Seraphine taught them kindness, courage, and how to listen to the silence between stars. The palace became a home, full of toys, scribbled drawings on ancient walls, and the constant sound of footsteps racing down crystal corridors. No longer just a symbol, Seraphine ruled with warmth, her children playing at her feet during council meetings. Yes, Minister, she'd say seriously, then whisper, Not now, Jax. Put the gravity knob back. Milo opened a school for useless but important skills, where aliens learned empathy, humans learned diplomacy, and everyone passed the mandatory class. How to apologize like you mean it. Decades passed. The void more receded, not defeated by war, but weakened by unity, by a galaxy choosing connection over fear. And when old age finally touched Milo's hair with gray, and Seraphine's glow softened like twilight, they sat once more on the balcony, surrounded by grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and a few adopted space creatures who just liked the food. They held hands, watching the rings of Xylos burn in quiet beauty. We did good, didn't we? Milo whispered. She smiled, leaning into him. We did us, and that was enough. And so, in the end, love didn't conquer all by force, but by persistence, laughter, grilled cheese, and 1,000 tiny choices to stay, again and again, together.